February 25th, 2025, U.S. Tariff Shockwaves and Malaysia's strategic calculus navigating legal volatility, trade leverage, and economic resilience. Malaysia now stands at a critical policy crossroads following a landmark decision by the United States Supreme Court that invalidated a substantial portion of former President Donald Trump's global tariff framework. In a 6-3 majority opinion delivered by Chief Justice John Roberts, the court ruled that the statutory provisions invoked by the administration did not authorize the president to impose sweeping global tariffs. Although Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh dissented, the majority's message was unmistakable. Executive power in trade policy is constitutionally limited. For Malaysia, the implications are both immediate and strategic. Investment, Trade and Industry Minister Datuk Seri Johari Abdul Ghani has confirmed that Malaysia signed the agreement on reciprocal trade with the United States but has not yet ratified it. This distinction is consequential. Legal volatility within the United States directly affects the predictability and durability of any bilateral trade arrangement. The issue is no longer confined to tariff levels. It now encompasses institutional credibility, constitutional limits on executive authority, global supply chain stability, and Malaysia's positioning in a world where even the largest economy must operate within judicially enforced constraints. The Supreme Court's ruling did more than nullify tariffs. It reaffirmed congressional primacy over commerce under Article 1 of the US Constitution. In doing so, it introduced a new risk variable into international trade negotiations: domestic judicial review. Future tariff measures may face legislative bottlenecks or renewed legal challenges, increasing uncertainty for trade partners, including Malaysia. The situation quickly evolved. Following the ruling, President Trump announced new global tariffs of 10%, reportedly raised later to 15%. Financial markets reacted positively in the short term, with US equities rising on expectations of reduced trade friction. Nevertheless, policy clarity remains uncertain. The United States appears to be recalibrating its approach rather than retreating from protectionist tendencies. What does this development signify for Malaysia? From a legal perspective, Malaysia's decision to withhold ratification of the agreement on reciprocal trade was prudent. Under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, signature does not automatically create binding obligations unless expressly stipulated. Malaysia retains sovereign discretion to evaluate whether US commitments remain credible and enforceable in light of constitutional constraints. Economically, the volatility underscores Malaysia's exposure to external policy shifts. The United States remains a major trading partner, particularly in electronics, semiconductors, palm oil derivatives, medical devices, and manufacturing supply chains. If US tariff policy becomes subject to recurring judicial contestation, Malaysian exporters may face a risk premium embedded in pricing, logistics, and compliance planning. Geopolitically, this episode reinforces a broader structural reality. Predictable, rules-based trade leadership from major powers is under strain. Trade policy is increasingly shaped by domestic political cycles, judicial oversight, and national security considerations. For middle-income economies such as Malaysia, resilience must be institutional and forward-looking rather than reactive. The immediate effect of a 10 to 15% global tariff depends on product classification and sectoral exemptions. Broad-based application would compress margins for affected exporters. However, carve-outs, particularly for strategic semiconductor supply chains, could mitigate adverse impacts. The United States remains reliant on Asian manufacturing ecosystems, and indiscriminate tariff escalation carries inflationary risks for its own economy. Malaysia's policy response should be structured along three coordinated pillars. First, sustained legal and diplomatic engagement. Malaysia must maintain continuous dialogue with US trade representatives to clarify the statutory basis of new tariff measures. If executive authority is constrained, congressional alignment becomes essential. Engagement with both branches of government is therefore a strategic imperative. Second, diversification. The court's ruling highlights the vulnerability inherent in over-reliance on a single market. Malaysia's participation in RCEP, CPTPP, and ASEAN trade architecture should be strengthened to deepen regional supply chain integration and reduce exposure to unilateral disruptions. Third, domestic competitiveness. Tariffs function as cost multipliers, enhancing value-added manufacturing, technological sophistication, and productivity reduces vulnerability to blunt trade instruments. Structural reforms under the Madani framework, governance transparency, industrial upgrading, and SME digitalization serve as economic safeguards. A research gap also warrants attention. Public discourse often emphasizes tariff percentages but overlooks enforcement mechanisms. If U.S. courts restrict executive authority, future tariffs may require congressional legislation, national security statutes, or sector-specific authorizations. Each pathway carries distinct durability and risk implications. Malaysian policymakers must monitor not only tariff announcements, but also the legal foundations underlying them. Paradoxically, the Supreme Court's intervention may enhance long-term predictability. By clarifying constitutional limits, it reinforces institutional checks and balances. Although short-term volatility increases, rule of law discipline may ultimately stabilize trade frameworks. Malaysia should neither overreact to headline developments nor underestimate structural shifts. A calibrated approach is advisable. Defer ratification until legal clarity improves, conduct sectoral exposure assessments, prepare contingency mitigation strategies, and accelerate ASEAN-centered integration. The central insight is clear. Sovereignty in trade policy is safeguarded through preparedness, not confrontation. Malaysia's cautious stance reflects institutional maturity. By evaluating implications before ratification, the government signals that bilateral agreements must rest on legal certainty rather than political fluctuation. The global trade environment is entering a period of recalibration. The United States is redefining executive authority within constitutional boundaries. Markets are responding to judicial decisions as much as policy announcements. In this context, Malaysia's advantage lies in strategic patience, diversified partnerships, and institutional resilience. The fundamental question is not whether US tariffs will fluctuate in the coming months. It is whether Malaysia can convert volatility into strategic leverage, strengthening its industrial base while engaging constructively with major powers. If managed prudently, this moment represents opportunity rather than threat, an opportunity to reaffirm sovereignty, deepen regional integration, and position Malaysia as a stable, rules-based partner in an uncertain global economy. The era of impulsive trade policy making is yielding to judicial scrutiny and political recalibration. Malaysia's mandate is clear: navigate turbulence with discipline, foresight, and strategic confidence.